Yo, New York in the house. It's Brooklyn in the house.
That's right.
It's Brooklyn.
I definitely felt like I don't know if it was an outcast, but I felt completely different.
Bad stuff. People blew up their cars and poisoned their dogs and stuff like that.
I also read that your nickname was Mirage because you were Mirage in class. You were there sometimes, most of the time you weren't. Is that true?
Well, I didn't feel pretty. I didn't feel like I fit in with other kids because I really didn't. Like, the one thing that made me feel special was my music.
Mariah Carey was born on March the 27th, 1969 in Huntington, New York, the youngest of 3 children as she had an older sister and a brother. She was named after the hit Broadway song they called The Wind Mariah. Her mother, who was white, was a former opera singer as well as a vocal coach. Her father, who was black and Venezuelan, was an aeronautical engineer. Mariah, who had self-identity issues, often felt like a stranger in her own house, as she did not resemble her father or her darker siblings. She also did not resemble her white mother, especially with her curly hair.
I definitely felt like I don't know if it was an outcast, but I felt completely different. I felt like there was nobody who could fully understand my experience. We all look different, but what I felt was that no friend, nobody I grew up with, nobody in school could even come close to relating to my experience because you feel different. I wrote a song about it on the Butterfly album called Outside, and it's about feeling ambiguous and without a sense of belonging. For me, definitely, growing up the way that I did, I felt, inside, and I never really expressed it to very many people, like I wasn't good enough, like I was, I didn't look like one particular group or another.
She often lived in fear of her older siblings as they were known to treat her harshly. Her older brother Morgan, who she describes as being violent towards her and her mother. Her older sister Allison would offer her drugs on several occasions. One time she gave her a Valium pill when she was only 12 years old, which caused Mariah to have a bad reaction. As she wrote in her memoir, "Within minutes, I think I was in a heavy, scary darkness, pushed down to a place beneath sleep, and I couldn't pull myself out." Another time she offered Mariah a pinky nail full of cocaine. Or what about the time her sister tried to sell her to a pimp? Or better yet, the time she was speaking to her father before passing the phone to Allison, who didn't want her father to know where she was. Upset, she would throw a cup of hot tea on Mariah's back, who later woke up in the hospital with 3rd-degree burns. Carey states that it took years before she could even take a simple pat on the back. This would serve as the last straw between Mariah and Allison, who Mariah now calls her ex-sister. As she would state, "When she burnt my back, she burnt my trust." Mariah would later state, "I have no doubt it is emotionally and physically safer for me to not have any contact with my ex-brother and ex-sister."
My brother and sister are a lot older than me. They went through their own drama, which was a lot worse than mine, because my parents were married when they were together. And so that was a whole different set of things that happened to them.
Mariah would also grow up with the fear of her surroundings, as the communities in which she was raised in did not appreciate her mixed-race family. When they lived in Huntington, their neighbors once poisoned the family dog as well as set fire to their car. When she was in the 8th grade, a group of wealthy white friends invited her to a sleepover in Southampton, only to trap her in a room and scream the N-word at her over and over again.
Initially, we moved into a white neighborhood, and I was the person who purchased the house, because we knew that if he came with me, we wouldn't get the house. There wasn't anything overt that happened in that house. But then I thought, I looked around the neighborhood and I said, what a way to raise 2 children. There are no black people here. Let's find a mixed neighborhood. We went to a mixed neighborhood. And then what happened was the black children didn't like my children because one of them looked whiter than the other. And the white children didn't like the other child who looked a little darker. And they didn't like us because we were living as a black and white couple, and that just wasn't done. And in 1969, we were in that neighborhood. And in 1970, when she was born, we moved out of the neighborhood to go to now another area where I thought, well, you know, it's a more affluent area. Maybe we will be accepted by this group of people. And of course, that was the worst. When we moved into this affluent area, I don't mean multi-million-dollar homes, but much more affluent than where we lived. And that was the beginning of just one of our dogs was poisoned. And we had a bow window in the front of the house. And when we were eating one night, or I was clearing the table, and someone shot through the window. Luckily, none of the children were in the room.
Older, and they kind of grew up more like in the 70s and late 60s. They had a lot of bad stuff. People blew up their cars and poisoned their dogs and stuff like that. They had bad things happen to them.
Well, my ex-husband said something that made an impression on me. Before we got married, I said to him, you know, what about children? And, you know, because at that time, you couldn't even stay in the same hotel room if you were, you know, black and white couple. And I said, what's going to happen with our children? And he said, any child of mine is going to be discriminated against.
Mariah's mother, Patricia, would be disowned by her family for marrying a black man, which was considered the lowest thing that you could do in the family, which meant grounds for her dismissal from her own mother.
Well, when I told my mother that I was going to marry a black man, she was very upset. She had the priest call me. And then I got married because I was in love with him, and I just felt it was the right thing to do.
And did the family disown you afterwards?
Yes.
Yeah.
For years and years, she never even told her brothers and sister that I was married.
But the marriage unfortunately would not last. Mariah's parents were divorced when she was only 3 years old, and Mariah would spend the majority of her childhood living with her mother, while her brother and sister lived with their father. Her relationship with her mother can be described as complicated at best, multi-layered, or simply just confusing. Mariah calls it a story of betrayal and beauty, of love and abandonment. Carey believes that she was neglected by her mother. According to a memoir, she also feels that her mother did not protect her, recalling a time where she nearly drowned at a beach at 7 years old, and her mother didn't even notice, even though she was hysterically crying. She also developed insecurities at a young age due to her mother's lack of interest in the upkeep of her biracial curly hair, which meant that Mariah's hair was often a mess. One time, her aunts on her father's side took matters in their own hand and tried to do something about Mariah's often neglected hair, but the hot comb damn near burnt their hair off before they aborted the mission.
It wasn't that I didn't like my hair when it was behaving, but as I grew up a little bit, it went from baby hair to like matted, unruly hair that nobody was combing through or understanding that you can't have a little girl running around with mats in her head. I feel like I was hated on by certain people in my family for having the lighter hair. But then if they only realized, like, no, actually, I have like matted hair, which is frizzy and curly, and like it could look good if we had some conditioner.
Mariah's childhood wasn't all bad, and there were many bright spots that would play a big role in the woman and singer that she would ultimately come to be. According to her mother, from the time Mariah was 3 years old, she was able to hear a sound and duplicate it exactly, and her mother knew that she was gifted from that point. Patricia, who was a Juilliard-trained opera singer and now a vocal coach, would give Mariah, as well as many others, vocal training. So her mother's home, which Carey called a shack, would be filled with other musicians who Carey considered like family, and they would have continuous jam sessions that Mariah would grow to love. As she once stated that live music was the best thing about living with her mother. Mariah would also state that she was always surrounded by the love of music, but even more importantly, the love of musicianship, the love of the craft, the love of the process.
My mother was an opera singer. She made her debut at Lincoln Center. She sang with New York City Opera all before I was born. And she came to New York from the Midwest, and then she ended up marrying my father, who had grown up in Harlem, and who was pretty much like this gorgeous, amazing looking
man. My mom struggled a lot. She worked a lot of different jobs. She used to be a singer, but then that wasn't really paying the rent, and she kind of stopped when she had kids. I'm the youngest of 3, and so by the time, I came around, she was working a lot of jobs. We moved like 13 times. Sometimes I had to live with different friends of my mother, when we didn't have a place to stay.
Mariah and her mother also shared good times together, but Mariah felt the shift in the dynamics of their relationship when her mother realized how talented she was becoming. This is when, according to Mariah, that her mother would feel jealous of her, and she began treating Mariah like a competitor instead of her daughter. She remembers a time when, as a teen, her mother yelled at her, "You should only hope that one day you become half the singer that I am." This occurred after they were having a sing-along in the car. Mariah, who was still bothered by those comments, even until this day, wondered if it was her mother's intentions to cut her down so low, saying, "All I know is those words that shot out her mouth pierced my chest and were buried in my heart." Carey loved her mother deeply, and she respected her as a singer and a working mother. She wanted to be her mom's light and make her proud, but it hurt Mariah very deeply to be treated that way by the person she admired and trusted the most. She was used to the jealousy that came from the world because of her talent, but she never fathomed it coming from her own mother. Mariah would also enjoy visits with her father's relatives in Harlem. Even though the neighborhood kids claimed she must be white, her cousins accepted her, which meant a lot. Despite the many fears that Mariah had in life, she had no fear of doing music. She would begin writing songs while in the 8th grade, which she would use as a release. At the age of 14, she would find work as a demo singer, creating jingles. While other kids her age were focused on school, Mariah would oftentimes be in the studio till 3 in the morning, and she would find herself missing class. Her classmates who got used to Mariah barely coming to school gave her the nickname Mirage.
I also read that your nickname was Mirage because you were a mirage in class. You were there sometimes, most of the time you weren't. Is that true?
Well, I mean, I don't want to encourage anybody not to go to school or anything, far be it from me, but I liked school. I was more social in school than I was a student, and I always knew I was going to be a singer. That's my thing. I'm very lucky that I am, because right now, who knows what I'd be doing. But I don't know. I have trouble getting up in the morning, that's why. I couldn't take getting to first period on time.
By the age of 15, Mariah was traveling back and forth from Long Island and Manhattan to visit her brother Morgan, who knew people in the entertainment industry as he was a personal trainer. Her brother would introduce her to songwriter Gavin Christopher, who was signed to Capitol Records, and Gavin, who was super impressed, began collaborating with Mariah. He would also connect her with his bandmate Ben Margulies, who would begin working with Mariah on her demo. For Mariah, there was no backup plan. Music was her only plan, and she would spend a great deal of her high school days traveling from Long Island to Manhattan for weeknight recording sessions in Ben Margulies' studio. Once she graduated from high school in 1987, she would make the decision to permanently move to Manhattan to pursue her music career while grinding and working as a waitress and a coat check girl. She also went to beauty school while continuing writing songs and working on music.
Well, the day after I graduated high school, I moved to Manhattan, and I lived with a bunch of other struggling singers and actresses and stuff. And I started waitressing.
Armed with an amazing demo with songs such as Vision of Love and Love Takes Time, Mariah would face rejection after rejection while struggling with life in the city, sometimes surviving off bagels and iced tea. After a challenging year, she would finally catch a break when she landed a tryout to be a backup singer for Brenda K. Starr, who had a top 20 hit. After being hired, Brenda would become close with Mariah and began campaigning for music industry execs to listen to Mariah's demo. In 1988, at the age of 18, Brenda would invite Mariah to an industry party for high-power industry executives, and Mariah's life would never be the same.
I was singing backup, and I had been doing that since I was 13, different sessions and people like that, and I was just this kid on the Upper West Side that a lot of musicians came to know as somebody who could sing. And one day, one of Brenda's backup singers quit or got sick or something, and one of the guys recommended me to go and try out for her. So I went, and she said to me, "What, are you trying to steal my job?" And then she hired me. And then I had a demo tape which I had been working on while in high school, writing songs, going into the city, working till 3 a.m. It was a tape that ended up having 3 number 1 songs on it. Little did I know, but And it was just my demo tape, and she would try to give it to people, but most people in the industry are like, yeah, tape, whatever, and they won't pay any attention. So she brought me to a party, which was for WTG Records, which was Walter, Tommy, and Jerry. Walter Yetnikoff, Tommy Mottola, and Jerry Greenberg. And she went, these guys were all looking at me, and I didn't really understand why. I was just this little teenage girl. I had borrowed her clothes. I didn't have anything to wear. The only thing I couldn't borrow were her shoes because my feet were too big, so I had sneakers on and this little dress. And there's this group of men, and she walks over and she goes to Jerry Greenberg. She says, "This is my friend Mariah. You know, she writes all her own songs. She's this, she's that, da-da-da-da." Goes to hand Jerry the tape, and Tommy Mottola grabbed it out of his hand. And the story has always been, people think I went up and boldly said, here's my tape. I didn't even know who he was. And so he heard the tape. I said, oh, then she told me who he was, and I said, okay, this guy's never going to listen to my tape. So he went out, left the party, listened to it in his limo. I left. I had already had a deal on the table with Warner Brothers, which I was about to sign through a producer I'd been signed to, so I almost didn't go to that party. So Tommy heard the tape, came back to find me, but I was gone. And he located me through her managers. I didn't have a lawyer, I didn't have anything. And I ended up signing there instead of going with Warner Brothers because I felt that he understood my vision.
I had a vision of love.
I think one of the reasons I pushed myself so hard and worked so hard is because I never felt special. Like, the one thing that made me feel special was my music. I didn't feel pretty. I didn't feel like I fit in with other kids, because I really didn't. We didn't have a lot of money growing up at all. And the one thing that kept me focused and kept me going was this total belief in myself that I had to have in order to know, like, I'm gonna get through this.